Mass shootings are unfortunately a fact of life in the United States. Given their frequency, most people probably think that random mass killings are hardwired into American DNA. Yet all of these attacks, from Columbine to Sandy Hook to Oxford High School, all stem from a single day, Tuesday, September 6, 1949. Howard Unruh was born to Samuel Unruh and Frida Vollmer. Howard and his younger brother James were raised by their mother after their parents separated. Howard grew up in East Camden, New Jersey, and graduated from Woodrow Wilson High School in 1939. Howard enlisted in the Army 3 years later in 1942 and served as an armor crewman across Europe between October 1944 and July 1945. Howard was known to be a straight edge. He was one of the few soldiers who never drank, swore, or chased after girls. Instead, he spent most of his time reading his Bible, writing long letters to his mother, and keeping meticulous notes on the enemies killed in battles, down to the details of the corpses. Howard was honorably discharged at the end of the war and returned to New Jersey to live with his mother. Howard began working as a sheet metal worker, which only lasted a brief time. He then enrolled at the Temple University School of Pharmacy in Philadelphia, but quit after a month. Now unemployed and supported by his mother's income working in a soap factory, he spent his days at home, decorating it with his medals, reading his Bible, and practicing his shooting in the basement, which he'd turned into a practice range. He had molds to create his own bullets, as well as a machete that he kept in his bedroom. Around this time, his mother Frida noticed how her son's behavior had changed so drastically since he had returned home from the military. He had become moody, nervous, and detached. She noted how angry he was all the time, which seemed as if it was displaced to everyone around him that seemingly had really done nothing wrong to him. Howard began to keep meticulous lists of those who had wronged him. A typical entry would list a neighbor of his, Mrs. Cohen, the wife of the local pharmacist Maurice Cohen, telling him to turn down his music. The Cohens had become Howard's #1 enemies, taking up page after page in his book of infractions. Apparently, it started when the Cohens asked Howard not to use their backyard as a means to access his apartment. Nevertheless, he would use it anyways. This had caused an ongoing feud, which eventually resulted in Howard installing a gate to separate the two properties. However, Howard's anger wasn't solely being caused by his problem neighbors. Unbeknownst to his mother Frida, her 28-year-old son had a dark secret that just about all the neighbors knew, and even the local children bullied him for, which seemed to be a cause of a lot of his frustration. Howard was gay. He had been in the closet for nearly his entire life. In 1949, admitting that you were gay wouldn't just get you ostracized, it could get you thrown in prison. Immediately after the war, Howard married a woman but ultimately felt only disgust at the thought of being with her romantically. When the marriage eventually fell apart, he finally found the courage to indulge in his sexual desires. Howard started a relationship with a man. He arranged to meet him the night of September 5, 1949, as he had done many times, at the Family Theater on Market Street, a popular gay theater where men would have sex in between features. However, after he waited 6 hours in the theater, it was clear to Howard that the man wasn't coming. And it was this failed connection that seemed to have pushed Howard to the edge. He returned home around 3 a.m. on September 6th to find the gate he had installed the day before to separate his property from the Cohens had been removed. Strange as it may seem, this was the moment that Howard decided to act upon his dark fantasies. He went inside, took out his German Luger P08, loaded it, and waited for morning. Sunrise would bring about the bloodiest day in Camden's history. At 8 a.m. on September 6th, Frida greeted her son with a breakfast of fried eggs and milk. For 10 minutes, it seemed as though that Tuesday would be the same as any other. Then, Howard finished his breakfast, went down to the basement, and came back with a blank look on his face and a wrench in hand. He raised it high above his head, as if intending to kill his mother. By talking calmly, she managed to keep him in place while she backed out the door and ran to a friend's house. With his mother out of his way, Howard grabbed a knife, some tear gas, his Luger, and headed out into the backyards of Kramer Hill. John Pilarchik, the local cobbler, was working behind the counter when Howard entered his store through the back door. Without saying a word, he shot John in the chest, and he fell to the floor. Howard then fired a second bullet right through his head. He had just crossed the first name off his list. Howard's next victim on his list was at the nearby barber shop, where his target, Clark Hoover, worked. Clark was cutting the hair of 6-year-old Oris Smith, who was due back at school the next day. Oris was sitting on a white rocking horse when Howard walked in. He shot the kid right through the head, staining the horse's flanks with blood. As Smith's mother screamed, Howard gunned down the barber and then walked back out into the street. For some reason, he'd chosen to execute a defenseless child. It was the first sign that Howard was moving beyond mere revenge and into something much darker. The moment he stepped out the barbershop was when his revenge killing transformed into a modern mass shooting. First a targeted list, the attacks had now become suddenly random. Passing a group of kids who raced for cover, a boy watching out a nearby window only just missed having his head blown off when Howard fired a shot at him. Across the street, bar owner Frank Engel was nearly hit when the gunman unloaded a few rounds through the door of his business. The two had never spoken in their lives. Howard made the most significant stop on his list, the drugstore owned by the Cohens. In his mind, these were the people who had made his life hell on earth. They'd torn down his precious fence. They'd spread rumors about his homosexuality, or so he believed. As he was about to enter the drugstore, a man he knew well, an insurance agent named James Hutton, came out the door. He greeted the shooter and politely said, "Excuse me, sir." James then received his own fatal bullet. He had sadly just been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Rose Cohen then grabbed her 12-year-old son, Charles, and ran upstairs. As Howard's feet pounded on the steps, she hid her son in a closet and then hid herself in a separate one. Her actions likely saved the young boy's life, because after Howard shot her in her hiding place, he apparently didn't think to look in the other closet. By keeping her son separate from her, Rose had ensured that he lived. Others in the house were not so lucky. Rose's mother, Minnie, was shot trying to call the police. Rose's husband, Maurice, who Howard thought had removed his fence, was shot trying to escape down the porch. The force of the bullet sent him flying into the street. Howard's work was almost done. He would kill one last victim, Helga Zagrino, who worked next door to the Cohens. Howard shot her as she was on her knees, begging for her life. It was a horrific, tragic moment, and it also marked the point when his rampage began to turn increasingly surreal. Howard's killings would now all be entirely random. Military veteran 24-year-old Alvin Day slowed down as Howard walked into the middle of River Road, only for the gunman to shoot him dead through his windshield, causing the car to careen onto the sidewalk. Helen Wilson and her mother, Emma Matlack, were killed waiting at a red light, while her 9-year-old son, John, caught a bullet through the neck. The saddest of all these pointless murders may have been Thomas Hamilton's. Just 2 years old, Thomas heard the gunshots and tottered over to the window to see what was happening. Howard shot him clean through the face. The toddler died instantly. For police responding to a mass shooting today, there are endless procedures to follow, ingrained by months and months of training. In 1949, none of that existed. So when the cops turned up to find Howard fleeing back inside his apartment, they went for what seemed like the safest option. The building was surrounded by 50 officers with pistols, shotguns, and machine guns. They opened fire. Years later, Patrick Sauer of Smithsonian Magazine estimated that around 1,000 civilians were in the line of fire that day, many of them simply milling around outside the apartment. Incredibly, with all the bullets pounding the building, no one got hurt. Unfortunately, that no one included Howard. Despite having hundreds of rounds fired at him, he managed to keep firing back, not sustaining a single injury. Meanwhile, a world away, Philip Buxton of the Camden Evening Courier was just receiving the first reports of the shootout. For some reason, he decided to look up Howard's number in the phone book and give him a call. Incredibly, he answered. As bullets whizzed through the air, the two had a short, strangely civilized conversation about the killings. When Philip asked how many he'd killed, Howard said that he didn't know, but proudly added that it looks like a pretty good score. When the reporter asked why he was killing his neighbors, Howard seemed taken aback. "I don't know," he replied. "I can't answer that yet. I'll have to talk to you later. I'm too busy now." And he hung up. At that point, a cop finally hurled tear gas into the apartment and smoked Howard out. With a call of "I'm surrendering," America's first mass shooter stepped out the door and into history. In the immediate aftermath of the killings, Howard made it clear that he was not a psycho and was in his right mind. Although he thought himself to be sane and provided clinical details of his crimes to investigating officers, no one at the time thought that a mass killer could be anything but insane. The day after his arrest, he was transferred to the Trenton Psychiatric Hospital. Locked away in its calm and peaceful grounds, the man who had just murdered 13 people would never be sentenced. Instead, a group of doctors pronounced him a paranoid schizophrenic, incapable of standing trial. In his Smithsonian Magazine article, Sauer argued that this was almost certainly a misdiagnosis. Howard didn't have any of the symptoms of schizophrenia. He was simply an angry, probably psychotic man who decided to kill his neighbors. Were his case to have come up in the modern age, he would almost certainly have been deemed fit to stand trial. Even Howard himself claimed that he should get the chair. But 1949 wasn't the modern age. Simply forgot about, Howard spent the rest of his life attending art classes and lounging around at Trenton Psychiatric Hospital. Not once in his remaining 60 years of life did anyone think to bring him to trial. Despite murdering 13 innocent people, he was never convicted of anything. Sadly, since 1949, America has grown accustomed to mass shootings. Almost 2 decades after Howard Unruh gunned down his neighbors in Kramer Hill, Charles Whitman would climb a tower at Texas University and shoot 16 strangers dead with a sniper rifle. By that point, Howard's story had faded into history. After Whitman's mass shooting, those who wanted to kill strangers were more likely to be influenced by the former sniper than the irrational mama's boy. Nonetheless, Howard's story remains important because he was the first, and also because his actions had no reason behind them. Charles Whitman's autopsy revealed that he had a brain tumor that badly affected his ability to feel and perceive emotion. Howard, however, was angry about offense. Today, we can probably all name enough mass shooters to fill the fingers of one hand. Every month seems to bring reports of a new massacres being committed and innocent people dying. Even without Howard, this would probably be the case. He was the first person to deal with alienation in such a senseless and horrific way, and though Howard may have only personally fired enough bullets to kill 13 people, his gunshots echoed throughout modern U.S. history. The 12-minute walk of death was America's first modern mass shooting that never really ended. Howard Unruh died on October 19, 2009 at the age of 88 years old. I'd like to take a second to thank you for tuning into Horrific Nightmares. If you would like to support this channel, you can leave a comment below and hit the like button. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with anyone you know who may enjoy it as well. And if you already aren't, I hope you would consider subscribing to the channel so that you won't miss any of my upcoming episodes. Once again, thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.